Hello, once again. It's July 15th, 2026. Haven't put up a video in a while, good long while. Anyone who actually watches these, sorry for that. For my very few subscribers, well, again, sorry for that. Surprised I even have subscribers. To be honest, didn't think anybody actually liked this stuff that much. um, I'm gonna get a little political, but in my normal brain dead unga bunga fashion. Uh, what a lot of people don't well, they understand, but it doesn't really come up all that often, is exactly what kind of relationship the United States and Canada actually has. Um, I'm pretty sure on YouTube alone, there's probably a whole bunch of political analyst guys, and definitely people with actual degrees that could break down the nuances and everything like that to those who are inclined. I'm just going to give you from a not so much a big picture perspective, but kind of a I don't know what you'd call it, general historical slash average Joe perspective, I guess. And again, I could be entirely wrong when it comes to historical references, although I have read more than a few books on the subject simply because I was simply curious. NAFTA is old in accordance to modern contracts, but it isn't actually that old. Mulroney, a man that has gotten a lot of disgust from Canadians over NAFTA and the Meech Lake Accords, which led to the profiteering of the Quebec separatist movement of the FLQ, which eventually led to the formation of the Bloc Québécois, probably one of the most misunderstood and hated parties throughout the nation because it simply shouldn't really belong in federal politics because it is a provincially orientated party. It'd be like if the IRA in Ireland and Northern Ireland ran for seats in London. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what the bloc does because of how our parliamentary system actually works. Because Quebec and Ontario have the most seats, and if the bloc gets the vast majority of the seats in Quebec, they get seats in the federal election, even if they're not an actual federally orientated party. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not going to try, because it would take forever. That's probably a different video in and of itself if people actually want me to go rambling on my disgust for how that province actually conducts itself in terms of its politics. Although, from what I understand, that's changing because the younger generation wants something different. Uh, but yeah, America and Canada, yes, we've gotten along, no doubt about it, but we've had our sour spots on more than one occasion. Now, nothing that you could write home about most of the time, besides the War of 1812 and that one, I don't know if you'd call it a dispute or a war over an island chain in the Vancouver Bay area in British Columbia. Uh, there really isn't much to tell except for maybe the Native Americans being genocidally wiped out by Americans, especially after the Battle of Wounded Knee, if you call it that, and basically having the Sioux Native American nation almost be completely wiped out, leaving the natives here and in what little strongholds the Sioux here, especially the Montana Sioux First Nation that lives just north of Pinoka. Well, they have a reservation north of Pinoka, being one of their longer lasting strongholds, if you can call it that, because yeah, that Native Americans became an endangered species thanks to what Americans did. Now, Canada wasn't any much better, but That's a topic for a different discussion only because the idea of it being government mandated assimilation, forced assimilation with the permission and implementation of the Catholic Church means that although we certainly didn't do the natives any favors by any stretch of the imagination, it was more of a longer period of genocide, and a lot of it was cultural with a good dump truck load of neglect, which led to a lot of people dying that really shouldn't have died because of the situation that they were in. I don't know enough about the details and I don't know the politics behind it, but I do know that there is a lot of information and misinformation on how the Native Americans got screwed over. And I will never, ever deny that they got screwed over because they did. They got screwed over hard. Colonization tends to do that. All you gotta do is look at Mexico and everywhere else where Europeans decided to basically, with maybe the exception of certain parts of Africa, because that continent is just wild. The harsh reality is that most places where Europeans settled or claimed or planted a flag, it was the natives that suffered for it. The Aboriginal people often get the beaten stick, mainly because they just either couldn't or wouldn't fight anywhere near as hard, or or they were tricked. Uh, what the East Indian Company did in India, for instance, that led to all the violence in India. That was plain Jane trickery. What does it got to do with America? I went on a tangent here. Well, it gets involved with the United States because the United States and Canada are basically neighbors. Geographically speaking, there's no way around it. You have Alaska in the far west, northwest, and you have the continental United States to our south. U.S. policy tends to involve us, whether we like it or not. There are a few things, however, that is quite interesting of late that is to note. The United States, under their current administration, as everyone knows, has been trying to get trade talks with Canada going for quite some time, and Canada has either left the table, the United States has either left the table, or both sides basically agreed, disagreed, nothing got done. A lot of changes occurred under Stephen Harper and then later Justin Trudeau in the way of Canadian economic policies. I don't know the full details, and I'm pretty sure it's probably a 500-page report, so I'm not about to get into the nitty gritty. Again, there are people that are better informed than I am. But due to these changes of policies, the one thing that we can infer on them is simple. Canada has been trying to diversify its economy for quite some time. Being basically umbilical corded to the United States doesn't actually help us. Most of our manufacturing doesn't belong to us, it belongs to American companies. Most of our source based materials, with the exception of agriculture, also tend, and whatever the natives don't own, and whatever the natives own, are the only exceptions to the rule that America owns pretty much the vast majority, if not the majority, of Canadian natural resources. In fact, I found out recently, and I don't know how true it is, so I would love to be corrected, but according to one weird statistical poll, there was actually an American Economic Forum that took Canadian resources as basically a give in for American national reserves, without understanding that we're an independent nation. We don't actually have, and you don't, and Americans don't actually have the authority to basically have that exchange, despite what people might want to think. Having control doesn't mean anything when you're looking at a nation who's socialistic enough that, given the right administration, they could nationalize it because they have before and basically kick the companies out. Waging a tariff war against Canada for any reason is never a good idea for those who are placing the tariffs. Not so much because Canada can outproduce or because it has other trade partners. Currently, it is, like I said, diversifying its trade to other nations and is currently expanding the very extensive trade network that Canada actually already has. But the harsh reality is that we work in bulk and we work with raw natural resources. Our actual manufacturing and refinement isn't that high, except for maybe in the oil industry. A lot of the natural resources that we have available, whether it be softwood lumber, hardwood lumber, lumber in general, oil, gas, energy, which I will keep separate because there is a separation. I don't know why people think there isn't. And because electrical power and oil and gas are two very different things. Uh, and as well as other natural resources such as iron, fertilizer, potash, basic steels, aluminum. The list goes on. We mostly do not refine and manufacture most of it. That's been changing recently, but for the most part, we basically grow it, we sell it to the United States, they refine it and do what they want with it, and then we buy it back. This isn't anything new, in fact. We've been doing this for over 100 years, in fact, since Canada's existence. Uh, so it doesn't come to any surprise to me that this has actually been the main process. This, however, has slowed down to a crawl simply because of the tariffs. Companies don't want to pay them, and governments don't want to pay them. The Canadian government, in particular, doesn't want to pay them, but they will if they have to, because they have to. Uh, this, of course, has led to basically a double tariff on something because whatever the United States tariffs, Canada has a tariff too. Again, this isn't anything new. Tariff systems and taxes aren't exactly a revolutionarily new thing. The reason why the Americans normally stop doing this with us after a period of time, and it normally takes a couple of administrations, don't get me wrong, 4 years under Donald Trump isn't probably going to stop the tariffs, because once the government gets money like this, they tend not to want it to stop. Uh, is simple. At the end of the day, they either do not have or are not willing to exploit the raw natural resources that are more easily and cheaply made and readily available up here. They would rather import our stuff than do it themselves. Now, again, I believe that is changing. Trump's main policies have been very big on an effective self-sustainability for as much as he can. There are certainly some things that he simply has to import, and therefore he only hopes that American exports improve through manufacturing and refining of their own products. Good for him. Whether it'll work in the long term, it should, but whether it's sustainable, I don't know. And frankly, nobody knows. That's something that, it's 10 years, 15, 20 years in the future. This tariff business, however, has led to a lot of snowbirds, as we call them, basically people who vacation or spend their winters in the United States, or have beachfront property or summer homes somewhere. Uh, they stop going there, and in fact, from according to one statistic I read from an actual American source in Arizona, there's been a lot of real estate that Canadians have bought that's now coming up for sale, simply because they're not going down there anymore. Uh, when it comes down to other operations in terms of government policies, the other big thing between Canada and the United States is our military mutual defense. Now, I'm not entirely sure if there's an actual treaty that dictates of mutual defense other than our membership into NATO. And in fact, what a lot of people like to forget, because Canada doesn't actually brag about some of the things that we've done, is NATO. Canada is actually a founding member of it. Now, in terms of our military policy, it is laughable and embarrassing at best. Carney has only just started. If the Prime Minister Carney, our Prime Minister, has only just started in the last year or so to actually put any effort into modernizing and increasing our military capacity. To be fair, we do not have the population of the United States. So say what you want about, America's military might. They have the population to sustain it. We do not, and we never have. And in fact, the only reason why we were able to contribute so many lives to World War One and Two is because we basically enlisted and then later at the near the end conscripted a large percentage of our actual population. Uh, in modern days, that's really not needed unless it's another huge war. The other issue that comes up with our defense spending and planning that involves the United States, whether we want it to or not, is NORAD. NORAD is a very touchy subject up here because, in one respect, we actually need it, and in one respect, we really, really don't. Uh, a lot of the radar and satellite technology that we currently use is actually pretty advanced. A lot of our problems hasn't been the technology itself; it's been the implementation of it. Uh, the other issue that comes up a lot has more to do with the fact that our weapons manufacturing isn't as high as the United States, and therefore it would take us longer to gear up. Not only that, our military policies are convoluted at best. Because of our restraint in terms of numbers, we cannot over specialize when it comes to our actual military capacity. A soldier wears many hats in the Canadian Army because it has to. The soldier has to. You have to be a generalist. You cannot be a specialist. Even during my time in the Army, that was basically the big thing. I had to be able to do multiple things depending on the circumstances. Now, there are some specific jobs that there was no way I was doing. But at the same time, when it comes to general infantry jobs, and more importantly, what I was doing as a driver of recovery vehicles as part of transport, the biggest thing about us was I wasn't just the driver. I had to be able to run the recovery crane. I had to be able to run uh, the onboard little piddly ass machine gun that we had, even though it didn't really do any good. I had to be able to I had to be able to basically, for every job that was on that truck, I had to be able to do it. So even though I was nothing more than a glorified tow truck driver, I still had to be able to do everything. Now you might think, well, what's the big deal with that? Well, it pretty much dictates our military policy. The reason why we stopped having a multiple aircraft, fixed wing aircraft fleet in our Air Force isn't because we could never afford it. We've had multiple ones before. A lot of it has to do with the fact that our recruitment for fighters, pilots is low, or our requirements are so bloody high that very few people can actually do it. Unlike the United States, which has the manpower pool to actually be able to have multiple aircraft being serviced, which is the other thing, maintenance, as well as operational procedures. The other thing that happens with Canada a lot when it comes to the United States in terms of a military sense is the fact that at the end of the day, because our policies are so varied and different, we are basically forced to integrate with American systems in order to actually use them. On the plus side, it means that we can communicate with American systems all the time because we actually know how they operate, because we actually have their hardware. On the downside, what it also means is that if we ever got into a confrontation, not so much militaristic one, but say a political one that would involve the United States basically not allowing us to integrate into their systems, what you basically have done is you shut down a strategic asset that you'll probably never get back again. Again, unless there's a war that actually would involve us or them or both. This has led to a lot of splitting hairs, so to speak, and a lot of people not really understanding what exactly can be found or done in relation to military support. It's also led to the rantings of Donald Trump being just that, rantings. Most Canadians don't take him seriously, and those that do really shouldn't. At the end of the day, even though because what he's doing is he's trying to save money. That's all he's doing. He's looking at the expense reports, and because he is more of an isolationist president, he's doing exactly what he voted for, what he got voted for. In my opinion, Carney, being the lukewarm liberal that he is here in this country, at the end of the day, and I mean liberal in terms of his party, not just his politics, at the end of the day, he's basically John Krushen style liberalism, and it means that we're going to be doing some things, but probably not enough to appease our southern neighbor. Because our southern neighbor doesn't seem to understand that things are a bit more complicated and better regulated up here than they are down there. We actually have a consensus on what actually needs to happen. And frankly, there's just enough nationality, although not as much as I would have liked, but just enough nationality to basically ensure that we know exactly, because of our inferiority complex and because of our differences, just as much as we are the same, we are in fact a different nation, whether people like to admit to it or not. And this means that tensions will either get better or get worse as time goes on, regardless on who's in power. When you have a milquetoast prime minister and a raging president, it tends to lead to some pretty interesting relational problems, especially with us moving more towards the European Union in terms of NATO partnership and more Commonwealth orientated operations than being saddled with the United States, which has been turning into a cancerous tumor for the past 35 fucking years. Anyway, that's all I have to say on that. Thank you. Uh, have a good one.